I want him off this plane." The woman in seat 2A said it the way other people order a second coffee. She didn't shout. She didn't need to. She simply looked at the flight attendant, then at the man across the aisle in 2B, the one in the wrinkled gray sweater with a 9-year-old girl asleep against his arm, and repeated it slower. "I said, I want him. Off this plane." 11 minutes later, Dr. Owen Reyes was walked up the jet bridge by 2 gate agents carrying his daughter's backpack in one hand and her shoes in the other, while 94 passengers watched through the windows and said nothing. He didn't argue. He didn't raise his voice. He asked exactly one question on the way out, and the gate agent would remember it for the rest of her life. Then 4 minutes after that, the cabin speakers clicked on, and the captain of Flight 147, a man with 19 years and 11,000 hours in the left seat, said a name over the intercom that made the woman in 2A go absolutely completely white. This is the story of what a rich woman's word is worth when a clock is running. And by the end of it, you'll understand why the airline didn't just apologize. They removed her. At 5:41 that morning, Dr. Owen Reyes was standing in his kitchen in Ballard holding a phone against his shoulder and a shoe in each hand. "Say that again," he said, slowly. On the other end, Dr. Naomi Chung was talking fast the way people talk when they're walking down a hospital corridor and doing math at the same time. 16-year-old female restrictive cardiomyopathy. She's been on the list 14 months. We got a match. Donor hearts coming out of Boise. Owen, the recovery team is already there. Owen closed his eyes for a second. Josie. Josie. He'd known that name for a year and 2 months. Josie Lindqvist. A girl who had learned to say the words ejection fraction before she learned to drive, who kept a running list on her phone of everything she was going to do the day she got a new heart, and who once told him with total seriousness that number 4 on the list was, argue with someone about something stupid just because I have the energy. "Where's Halverson's team?" Owen asked. "That's the problem." Naomi's voice tightened. "Deshpande's in the OR with the aortic kid 6 hours minimum. Ellis is in Croatia. Owen, for this repair on this anatomy in this hospital, it's you or it's nobody. I've already got a room and a perfusionist. What I don't have is a surgeon in Denver." Owen was already moving. Cross-clamp window. Heart comes out around 8:15 our time. You know the number. He did. 4 hours. 4 hours from the moment a donor heart stops receiving blood to the moment it needs to be beating in someone else's chest. And every minute after the 4th hour, the odds get worse in a way no amount of skill can fix. 4 hours is not a guideline. It is a physical fact about muscle tissue, and it does not care who you are, how much you paid, or how badly a child wants to grow up. "Charter," Owen said. "Grounded. There's a whole system sitting on the Cascades this morning. Nothing small is going out of Boeing Field until noon. I've got you on Cascadia 147 out of SeaTac 705. Gets you on the ground at Denver International at 10:11 local, and I will have a car on the curb with its engine running." Owen looked at the clock on the microwave, 5:44, and then he looked at the hallway where his daughter Nell was standing in her pajamas, hair everywhere, holding the stuffed orca she'd had since she was 4. His sitter had the flu. His mother was in Yakima. It was 5:44 in the morning. "Naomi," he said. "I have Nell." There was half a second of silence on the line, the sound of a woman recalculating. "Bring her," Naomi said. "Peds will watch her. Half our nurses have kids, Owen. She'll be the most spoiled child in Colorado by noon. Just get on the plane." If you had seen Owen Reyes at the airport that morning, you would not have looked twice. He was 38, medium height, built like a man who used to swim and no longer had time to. He was wearing a gray crewneck sweater that had been through the wash too many times, jeans and running shoes with the heels broken down. He hadn't shaved. He had a canvas duffel over one shoulder, a child's purple backpack over the other, and he was holding his daughter's hand at the security line while she explained to him at length the differences between the orcas of the northern and southern resident pods. And the southern ones only eat salmon, Dad, which is why they're the ones in trouble, because if there's no salmon, then there's no orcas, Owen said. "Shoes off, Bug." "I know, I'm doing it." He looked like a tired dad taking a kid on a trip. That was all. There was nothing about him that said anything else. No scrubs, no badge on a lanyard, no white coat. His hospital ID was in the front pocket of the duffel face down under a granola bar. There is a thing about surgeons that people who don't know surgeons tend to get wrong. On television, they are arrogant. In life, the good ones are usually the quietest people in the room because the job selects for it. You cannot be a person who needs to be seen and also be a person who spends 9 hours doing millimeter work on a heart the size of a plum. The ego burns off. What's left is a strange, flat calm, a man who can be told terrible news and respond by asking a very specific question about numbers. Owen had that calm. He'd had it for years, and it was about to be mistaken by several people for weakness. At the gate, he did 2 things. First, he texted Naomi boarding. Have OR call me if the recovery team slips. Second, he crouched down in front of Nell and pushed her hair out of her face. Okay, here's the deal. When we land, we're going straight to a hospital, and I'm going to have to go be a doctor for a really long time. Like longer than a whole school day. I know. There's a girl there named Josie who's been waiting a really long time for someone to help her. Nell considered this with the deep gravity of a 9-year-old. Is she scared? Owen thought about it. He never lied to her. It was a rule he'd made early after her mother left, when he'd figured out that a kid who is lied to about small things stops believing you about big ones. Probably, he said. I'd be. Are you scared? A little. Nell nodded satisfied as though that were the correct answer and she'd been checking. Then she said, Can I have the window? They boarded with Group 1. Naomi had booked the only 2 seats left on the aircraft, which happened to be in the first-class cabin 2B and 2C, not because anyone was being extravagant, but because coach had been full for 6 hours, and there was a heart coming out of a donor in Boise at 8:15. Owen let Nell take the window. He put her orca on her lap, put her backpack under the seat in front of her, and sat down in the aisle seat with his phone in his hand, watching the clock. 6:47 a.m. Across the aisle in 2A, a woman was already seated, and she had been watching them since the moment they came through the cabin door. Her name was Vivian Hale, and she was by any measure the world usually uses an important person. She was 56. She was wearing camel-colored cashmere and the kind of jewelry that is expensive precisely because it does not look expensive. She had a leather folio open on her tray table and a phone face down beside it. Her hair had been done that morning at an hour when most hair is not done. Vivian Hale's grandfather had made money in timber. Her father had turned it into money in shipping, and Vivian had turned it into the thing that money becomes in its 3rd-generation position. She sat on 4 boards. She had a foundation with her family's name on it. There was a hospital pavilion in Denver, a good 1 glass and light with a healing garden that had her name carved into the stone above the entrance, because the Hale Family Foundation had given $11 million to build it. She flew Cascadia Air roughly 90 times a year, always in 2A, and she was on the board of directors of Cascadia's parent company. Not a ceremonial seat, a voting one. She was not, it should be said, a monster. That is the boring truth about people like Vivian Hale, and it is the reason stories like this one keep happening. She gave away real money to real causes. She had wept genuinely at the ribbon cutting for the pavilion. She thought of herself, and this is the important part, as one of the good ones. But she had also spent 30 years in rooms where her discomfort was the most important fact in the room. And when a person spends 30 years like that, something quietly rots. They stop being able to tell the difference between this is wrong and this is not what I would prefer. Both feel identical from the inside. Both produce the same phrase, this is unacceptable. Behind her in 3A sat a younger woman with a tablet and a travel mug. Delia Frost, 31, Vivian's executive assistant of 4 years. Delia's job on paper was scheduling. Her job in practice was to be the person who absorbed the first shockwave of every one of Vivian's dissatisfactions and converted it into something the outside world could survive. She was very good at it. She was also, though she had not admitted it to herself in words yet, about 11 months past the point where she'd stopped respecting her employer. Remember Delia? She's going to matter more than anyone on this aircraft, including the captain. The flight attendant working the forward cabin was named Trent Colby. Trent was 29, 3 years with Cascadia, and he had figured out something early that a certain kind of person always figures out, that the fastest way up is not to be good at the job, but to be useful to people who are above you. He knew Vivian Hale on sight. He knew she flew 90 times a year. He knew, or believed he knew, that she'd once mentioned a flight attendant by name in a note to the airline, and that the flight attendant had been promoted within the month. So when Trent came through the cabin, his voice changed depending on where he was standing. At 2A. Ms. Hale, good morning, sparkling water, no ice lime on the side, and I've got the journal if you'd like it. At 2B and 2C. Sir, ma'am. A glance at Nell's stuffed orca. A glance at Owen's sweater. You two are in the right seats. Owen looked up. We are. Just checking. Trent smiled without any part of his face agreeing to it and moved on. Nell, who missed nothing, whispered, Why'd he ask that? Because we don't look like we belong up here, Owen said mildly. Read your book. That's rude. It is. He didn't elaborate. He was looking at his phone, 6:53, and above all of them, standing at the front of the aircraft with a boarding manifest in her hand, was the person who would ultimately make the single worst decision on Flight 1147. Sylvia Nunn, the lead flight attendant. Sylvia was 51, 23 years with the airline. She had a reputation among crews as someone who handled things, which in practice meant she believed the fastest way to solve a problem was to remove the least powerful person involved in it. It had worked over 23 years an enormous number of times because it almost always does. 3 people. Trent, who wanted to be useful upward. Sylvia, who wanted the problem gone. And Vivian, who had lost the ability to distinguish between an injustice and an inconvenience. None of them knew there was a clock running. None of them knew that the man in the gray sweater was the only reason a 16-year-old girl in a building with Vivian Hale's name on it had any chance at all of seeing 17. It was 6:58 a.m. The cabin door closed at 7:01. It started with an elbow. That is genuinely how it started. Not with a slur, not with a scene with an elbow and a paper cup of orange juice and a 9-year-old who is excited about clouds. At 7:22, 11 minutes after takeoff, Trent came through with the pre-departure service he'd delayed until cruise. He set a glass of sparkling water on Vivian's tray. He set a small orange juice on Nell's. Nell, who was pressed against the window narrating cloud formations to her orca, turned around fast to say thank you because she had been raised to say thank you, and her elbow caught the edge of the cup. Maybe 2 ounces of orange juice went over the armrest across the aisle and onto the toe of Vivian Hale's shoe. Not her clothes. Her shoe. Nell froze. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I'm sorry. It's okay, Owen said immediately, already reaching for napkins. It's okay. It was an accident. He looked across the aisle. I'm sorry about that. Can I? Vivian Hale looked down at her shoe. And here is where the story turns, and it turns on something very small. Because there was a version of this morning where Vivian Hale said, "Don't worry about it," and dabbed her shoe with a napkin, and the flight went to Denver and a girl got a heart, and none of these people ever thought about each other again. That version was available. It was right there. It cost nothing. Instead, Vivian exhaled through her nose in that particular way and said, "Do you have any idea what these are?" Owen paused with the napkins in his hand. "I'm sorry." "These shoes." She said it the way you'd explain something to a slow child. "They're not, you can't just..." She stopped, gathered herself, and switched to the register she used for staff. "Where is the attendant?" "Ma'am, it was juice. I'm happy to pay for the cleaning, but I'm not asking you for money." "Okay," Owen said. And then, because he was a father, and because his daughter was rigid in her seat with her hands over her mouth, she apologized. She's 9 and she apologized. I'd appreciate it if you'd accept it. It was the mildest sentence in the world. But Vivian Hale had spent 30 years in rooms where nobody told her what she would appreciate, and something in her face closed like a door. "Excuse me." I said she apologized. "I heard what you said." She turned. "Trent, bull." He was there in 4 seconds, which tells you everything about who he'd been listening for. "Ms. Hale, I saw. I'm so sorry. Let me get you a warm towel and I'd like these seats reassigned," Vivian said. "Or theirs. I don't care which. I have a board meeting in 4 hours and I need to prepare and I can't do it in a splash zone." Trent's eyes flicked across the aisle. He took in the sweater, the broken-down running shoes, the stuffed orca. He made a calculation that took less than a second, and it was the wrong one, and it would cost him his career. "Of course," he said. "Sir, would you and your daughter mind moving back? We've got seats available in the main cabin." Owen didn't move. "There's no need for that. She spilled juice. I've cleaned it up. We're not going to spill anything else." "Sir, I'm trying to accommodate everyone." "You're trying to accommodate one person," Owen said. Still level, still quiet. "That's a different thing." Nell had gone very small in her seat. And Vivian Hale, watching this, made her second choice of the morning the one that mattered. Because up to this point she could have retreated with her dignity intact. Instead, she picked up her phone, turned it face up, and said the sentence that would end her public life. "Do you know who I am?" Owen looked at her for a long moment. "No," he said. "Should I?" That was 7:26 in the morning. The donor heart in Boise was still beating in the donor's chest. There were 4 hours and 49 minutes left. Vivian did not answer the question. She did something more effective. She opened her folio, took out a business card, and held it out not to Owen but passed him to Trent. "Give this to your lead, please." Trent read it on the way up the aisle. Whatever was on it made him walk faster. Sylvia Nunn came back within 90 seconds. "Here's what you need to understand about the next 10 minutes. At no point did anyone lie exactly. What happened instead was that a story got assembled in the air, out of true parts arranged in a false shape. And once a story like that exists, it becomes extremely difficult to take apart, because everyone who repeats it has now invested in it being true." "Sir?" Sylvia crouched slightly, the professional crouch hand on the seat back. "I understand there's been an incident." "There's been a spilled orange juice," Owen said, "and a verbal altercation." "There was no altercation. Ms. Hale says she felt spoken to aggressively." Owen turned his head and looked at Vivian. Vivian looked at her folio. "Ma'am," he said, "I'd like to be very clear because I think this may matter later. My daughter knocked over a cup. I apologized. I cleaned it. I offered to pay. I was asked to change seats and I said I'd rather not. That is the entire event. If any part of that was aggressive, I'd genuinely like to know which part." Sylvia Nunn had 23 years of experience, and every one of those years told her the same thing. The calm one is not the problem, but the calm one is the easier one to move. You cannot reason with a person who has a board seat. You can absolutely reason with a tired man in a sweater who is trying not to upset his kid. "I'm going to need you to lower your voice," she said. Owen's voice had not gone above conversational once. Nell, 9 years old, and already learning the shape of this, said in a small voice, "He's not being loud." Sylvia didn't look at her. She looked at Owen. "Sir, if you'd move to 14C and 14D, this all goes away." And Owen Reyes, who had a heart coming out of a chest in Boise in 51 minutes, made a decision that he would turn over in his head for a long time afterward. "No," he said. Not because of the seat. He genuinely did not care about the seat. He'd have sat on the floor by the lavatory if it got him to Denver. He said no because Nell was watching, and because he had spent 9 years teaching a child that when you have done nothing wrong you do not have to move, and because some part of him understood correctly that moving would not end it. It would only establish that he could be moved. "I'm sorry," he said. "We paid for these seats. My daughter has been polite. I've apologized twice. We're going to stay." Sylvia straightened up, and that was the moment it stopped being about juice. Word moves through a first-class cabin faster than through a small town. By 7:40, everyone in the first 3 rows knew something was happening, and about half of them had constructed a theory. The man in 1D, a sales director from Boise, had decided the guy in the sweater was probably drunk. The couple in 3C and 3D had decided the opposite. Nobody said anything out loud because that is what people do. They take a side silently and wait to find out which one is going to be embarrassing. Trent came through again and pointedly did not offer Owen a refill. He did offer Vivian a fresh sparkling water, and while he was leaning over her seat, he said something with a small laugh, and Vivian made a small laugh back, and Owen, who was not meant to hear it, heard the tail end. People who get upgraded once and think they own the cabin. Nell heard it too. She looked up at her dad. "Are we upgraded?" "No bug. We bought these seats." "Then why'd he say that?" Owen was quiet for a second. His phone said 7:44. The heart was coming out in 31 minutes, and he was arguing about a seat. "Because it's easier to be unkind to someone if you decide first that they don't belong," he said. "People do it so they don't have to feel bad. Remember it because you're going to see it again." "That's stupid." "It is," he agreed. "Read your book." But she didn't read her book. She watched her father's face and she saw something she had never seen there, not anger exactly, something closer to grief. In 3, Delia Frost had put down her tablet. Delia had been half listening for 20 minutes in the way she always half listened, with the professional numbness of a person whose job is to smooth things. But something about the phrase, "people who get upgraded once," had landed wrong. She looked at the man in 2B. She looked at his shoes and the kid's stuffed orca and the phone he kept turning over in his hand, and checking every 90 seconds like a man waiting for a verdict. That's not what an entitled man looks like, Delia thought. That's what a frightened man looks like. She opened a new note on her tablet and without entirely deciding to began typing down the times. July 26th, spill. July 31st, asked to move. July 38th, refused. July 44th, TC comment. Upgraded once. She did not know why she was doing it. She would find out in 40 minutes. At 7:52, Vivian Hale wrote an email. She wrote it on the aircraft Wi-Fi from seat 2A, and she sent it to two people. Cascadia's VP of Customer Experience and the Chief of Staff to the CEO, both of whom she had met, both of whom knew exactly which board she sat on. The email was 140 words long, and it did not contain a single false factual statement, which is what made it lethal. It said there had been an incident in the forward cabin. It said a passenger had been verbally aggressive toward her and had refused crew instruction twice. It said she did not feel comfortable. It said she assumed the crew would handle it appropriately, and that she'd rather this not become a matter for the full board. That last sentence is the entire crime. Not a lie. A weight placed on a scale by a person who knew exactly how much she weighed. 11 minutes later, Sylvia Nunn's crew tablet chimed with a message from Ground Ops that she read twice. She walked back to 2B. "Sir, I need you to gather your things." Owen looked up. "What?" "We're returning to the gate." The words took a second to land. Around them, the cabin went quiet in that specific way, the sound of 30 people pretending not to listen. Owen sat forward. "Ma'am, we're 40 minutes into a 2-hour flight. We're being directed back to the gate to resolve an onboard disturbance." "There is no disturbance." For the first time all morning, something entered Owen's voice, not volume but pressure. The sound of a man pressing very hard on a door that will not open. "Ma'am, listen to me. I need you to listen to me for 10 seconds. I am a transplant surgeon. There is a 16-year-old girl at Halverson Children's in Denver who is going into an operating room in 3 hours, and there is a donor heart being recovered in Boise right now, and I am the surgeon. If this aircraft turns around, she does not get that heart. Do you understand what I'm telling you?" Sylvia Nunn looked at him. She looked at the gray sweater, the unshaven face, the running shoes with the broken heels, the kid, the stuffed orca. And 23 years of pattern recognition, the thing she was proudest of. The thing that had never once failed her told her that this was what people say when they don't want to be moved. She had heard, "I'm a lawyer." She had heard, "I'm a federal agent." She had heard, "My mother is dying twice," from men who were simply drunk. "Sir," she said, "do you have any documentation of that?" And Owen Reyes, who had thrown a duffel over his shoulder at 5:51 in the morning while putting shoes on a 9-year-old, reached for the front pocket of his bag to produce a hospital ID card he could not in that moment immediately find because the granola bar had shifted and because his hands were not entirely steady. Hold on, it's in here." "Sir, it's in here. Give me 10 seconds. That was the 10 seconds. That was the whole thing right there. 10 seconds and a granola bar. "Sir, I need you to gather your things." Cascadia Flight 1147 landed back at SeaTac at 8:14 a.m. and taxied to Gate S9. The captain's voice came on during the taxi flat professional, giving nothing away. "Folks, apologies for the disruption. We've returned to the gate for an operational matter. We expect to be back in the air shortly." An operational matter. That is the language institutions use when a human being is about to be removed from a place, and it exists precisely so that no one has to hear what is actually happening. 2 gate agents came aboard. One of them, a young woman named Corinne Baptiste, would give a statement 4 days later that a federal investigator described as the single most useful document in the file. They stopped at row 2. "Sir, we're going to ask you to come with us." Owen stood up. He did not argue. This is the part that people who watched it could not stop describing afterward. He did not argue at all. He had spent 19 minutes trying to make 3 people understand a fact about a girl's heart, and somewhere in there he had understood something himself, that he was not going to win this here. That every second he spent fighting on this aircraft was a second not spent finding another way, and that the most dangerous thing in the world for Josie Lindqvist right now was Owen Reyes losing his temper on an airplane. So he did the arithmetic the way he did it in an operating room, when a repair failed at hour 6 and there was no time for feelings. "This route is closed. Find another one." "Nell," he said. "Shoes on bug. We're getting off." "Are we in trouble?" No, we're not in trouble. He crouched to help her, and his hands were steady now because they always were when it counted. We're going to go find a different way to Denver. He put her orca in her backpack. He picked up her shoes because she couldn't get them on fast enough, and he didn't want her holding up the aisle in front of 90 people. He straightened, and he looked for 1 second only across the aisle at Vivian Hale. She was looking at her folio. She did not look up. Later, she would say under oath that she genuinely believed at that moment that she was dealing with an aggressive passenger, and that she had done nothing but report her experience. And the terrible thing, the thing that makes this story worth telling, is that she probably wasn't lying. The whole cabin watched them go. 94 people. Nobody said anything. Not the sales director in 1D. Not the couple in 3C and 3D. Not the man in 4A who had heard the entire exchange and had thought distinctly that guy said something about a transplant. Everybody had a reason. Everybody's reason was that somebody else would surely say something, and that it wasn't really their business, and that the crew must know more than they did. That is how it works. It is almost never one villain. It is one villain and 93 people doing nothing. Halfway up the aisle, Nell started to cry, not loudly, just the silent kind with her face turned into her father's sleeve. And Owen Reyes, walking his daughter off an aircraft in his socks and broken sneakers, in front of an entire cabin of people who had decided who he was, said the only thing he said out loud on that walk. It's okay. You didn't do anything wrong. At the top of the jet bridge, Corinne Baptiste, the gate agent, was writing on a clipboard, not making eye contact because that is what you do. And Owen asked her his one question. What time does the next Denver flight leave? Corinne looked up. She had expected shouting. She had been braced for shouting. She had done this 11 times in 2 years, and there was always shouting. 10:40, she said. Alaska, out of sea. Thank you. He shifted the backpack on his shoulder. Is there any way to get me on it? Sir. She stopped. She looked at him properly for the first time at the exhaustion and the kid and the total absence of anger where anger should have been, and something in her stomach went cold. Sir, can I ask what's in Denver? Owen Reyes said, a 16-year-old girl named Josie who is going to die today if I'm not there. And then he said, it's not your fault. Can you help me? Corinne. Baptiste stood there holding a clipboard. Then she did the single most important thing anyone did that morning. She picked up the gate phone and she called the flight deck of the aircraft she had just helped to empty of a passenger, and she said, Captain, I need you to hold. I think we just made a mistake. It was 8:23 a.m. The donor heart had been out of the donor's chest for 8 minutes. 3 hours and 52 minutes remained. The captain of Flight 1147 was named Ray Okafor. 19 years, 11,000 hours. Before that, 8 years flying C-17 for the Air Force, including 2 years on aeromedical evacuation runs out of Ramstein, which is a detail that matters because it meant Captain Okafor had spent a portion of his life flying aircraft whose only purpose was to get a specific human body to a specific operating room before a specific window closed. He listened to Corinne Baptiste for about 40 seconds. Then he said, say that name again. Reyes. Dr. Owen Reyes. Okafor pulled up the manifest on his tablet. Then he opened the ops message his crew had received at 7:59, the one directing the return to gate, and he read the notation attached to it. And then he did something a captain very rarely does. He picked up the phone to company dispatch and said, I need you to check something for me right now, and I need you to check it fast. Is there a medical priority flag on any passenger on this manifest? There was a pause of maybe 15 seconds. The dispatcher's voice came back changed. Captain, affirmative. Seat 2B. Flagged at 0611 under MPP. Requesting hospital was Halverson Children's, Denver. MPP. Medical Priority Protocol. Captain Okafor closed his eyes for exactly 1 second. Then he unbuckled, walked out of the flight deck, and stood at the front of the first-class cabin, and instead of speaking to the crew, he reached up and took down the PA handset, and he switched it to all call so that it went to every speaker on the aircraft forward to back. 94 people heard what he said next. Ladies and gentlemen, this is Captain Okafor. I need 90 seconds of your attention, and I'm going to speak plainly because I don't think there's a polite way to do this. The passenger who was removed from seat 2B a few minutes ago is Dr. Owen Reyes. He is a pediatric cardiothoracic surgeon at Seattle Children's. He was booked on this flight at 6:11 this morning under our medical priority protocol at the request of Halverson Children's Hospital in Denver, where a 16-year-old patient is scheduled for a heart transplant at 11:30 local time. He is the operating surgeon. That flag was on the manifest before any of us boarded this aircraft. It was on my screen. It was on the crew's screen. Nobody looked. I turned this airplane around because I was told there was a disturbance in the forward cabin. There was no disturbance. There was a spilled drink and a complaint, and we removed a physician from a medical transport, and a child is waiting in an operating room in Denver. That's on me, and it's on this crew. It is not on him. Dr. Reyes is currently standing on the jet bridge. I'm going to go get him. When I bring him back on board, you're going to leave him alone, and you're going to let him sit down, and we are going to go to Denver. Thank you. The click of the handset going back in its cradle was the loudest sound in the cabin. Then Captain Ray Okafor turned around and looked directly at seat 2A. He didn't say a word to her. He didn't have to. 94 people had just watched him look, and Vivian Hale watched every one of them turn to see what he was looking at. She had gone the color of paper. Here is where it stops being a story about rudeness and becomes something else entirely. Because at 8:31 a.m., while the captain was walking up the jet bridge, Delia Frost stood up from seat 3A with her tablet in her hand. She did not go to her employer. She went to Sylvia Nunn. I need to show you something, Delia said, and then I need to send it to your legal department, and I'd like you to be a witness that I sent it. She turned the tablet around. On the screen was a PDF. It was 11 pages long, and its header read, Cascadia Air Group Board Resolution, 2019-04, Establishment of Medical Priority Protocol. This is the policy the captain just referenced, Delia said. It requires the crew to verify medical priority flags before any denial of boarding or removal. It was drafted by the Passenger Advocacy Committee. It passed the board unanimously in March of 2019. She scrolled to the last page where the signatures were. At the top of the signature block above the CEOs in the position reserved for the committee chair who sponsored the resolution was a name. Vivian R. Hale. She had written it. 6 years earlier, she had sat in a boardroom in Portland and chaired the committee that created the Medical Priority Protocol, and she had made a short speech that was quoted in the minutes about how an airline is a public utility with a moral obligation to the sick. It had been by every account sincere. The pavilion in Denver went up 2 years later. There is a photograph of her at the ribbon cutting holding scissors next to a 9-year-old cardiac patient. And at 7:52 that morning, she had sent an email that caused her own policy to be violated in order to have a man removed from an airplane because his daughter spilled juice on her shoe. That is what the phrase hoist by your own petard actually means. Not irony. Not coincidence. It means the machine you built and were proud of and put your name on turns out to be the exact machine that grinds you. Delia, Vivian said from across the aisle. Her voice had changed. Delia put that away. Delia Frost, 31 years old, 4 years of absorbing shockwaves, 11 months past the point of respect, did not put it away. No, she said. I don't think I will. And then because she was very good at her job, right up until the moment she stopped doing it, she added the detail that would end up in the Department of Transportation filing. Ms. Hale sent an email at 7:52 to 2 executives referencing her board seat. I have it. It went to my inbox as well because I'm copied on everything she sends. I'll be forwarding that too. Owen Reyes came back down the aisle at 8:36 a.m., carrying his daughter's shoes. The cabin did not applaud. That's not what happened, and it's worth saying so, because the truth is stranger and better. 94 people sat in absolute silence and could not look at him. Shame is quieter than cheering. He sat down in 2B. He buckled Nell in. He put the orca on her lap. His hands by then had gone entirely steady. Trent Colby tried to say something as he passed, began the word sir, and Owen said without any heat at all, please don't. Flight 1147 pushed back at 8:44 and landed at Denver International at 11:02 local. Captain Okafor had requested and received priority handling from ATC, which is a thing that can be done for a medical transport, and which nobody had thought to request the first time, because nobody had looked at the flag. There was a car at the curb with its engine running. Dr. Owen Reyes was scrubbed and in the operating room at Halverson Children's at 11:51 a.m. The donor heart had been out of the donor's chest for 3 hours and 36 minutes. He got 24 minutes. The cross clamp came off at 3:19 that afternoon. Josie Lindqvist's new heart fibrillated, was shocked once, and began to beat on its own in a chest that had been waiting 14 months for it. Nell Reyes spent the afternoon in the pediatric family lounge on the 4th floor of the Hale Pavilion eating vending machine pretzels and being, as predicted, spoiled by nurses. Trent Colby was terminated for cause. Sylvia Nunn, 23 years, the woman who handled things was terminated as well. In her exit interview, she said the sentence that ended up being quoted in an internal training module, "He didn't look like a surgeon." She meant it as an explanation. It was read correctly as the entire problem. The Department of Transportation opened an inquiry. Cascadia Air Group settled it by consenting to an independent audit mandatory retraining on the Medical Priority Protocol across all crew bases, and a hard systems change. MPP flags now generate a red banner on the crew tablet that cannot be dismissed without two-person acknowledgement. Corinne Baptiste, the gate agent who picked up the phone, was promoted to a station supervisor role. She has since told the story to something like 4,000 new hires, and she always tells it the same way, and she always ends it on the same line. I had already done the wrong thing. Picking up that phone was just the second decision. Delia Frost resigned her position on the Monday. She now works in patient advocacy at a hospital system in Portland and does not talk about it much. And Vivian Hale. The board of Cascadia Air Group met on a Thursday. It was not a long meeting. There was no need for one because there was no argument to be had. The woman who had chaired the committee that wrote the Medical Priority Protocol had invoked her board seat to cause its violation in writing on the record, and had done it over a shoe. Every director in that room understood that if this reached a courtroom, her email was the plaintiff's entire case. She was asked to resign. She resigned. 2 of her other 3 boards followed within the month. The Hale Family Foundation issued a statement. Halverson Children's Hospital, which had been in discussions about a second building, quietly restructured the gift and declined the naming rights. The pavilion kept its name. Josie Lindqvist recovered in a room on the 3rd floor of it, under a stone lintel with the name Hale carved into it. And there is something almost unbearably fitting about that a woman's best act and her worst act ended up in the same building, and that the girl in the bed was saved by the policy she wrote from the email she sent. Vivian Hale never contacted Owen Reyes, not once. Some people apologize. Some people simply stop appearing in public. She was 62 when the story ran in a national paper, and the reporter noted that she had declined to comment, except for a single sentence delivered through a representative. "I did not know who he was," which was, of course, entirely true, and which was, of course, the whole point. There is a photograph that Owen Reyes keeps in his office, and it is not the one you'd expect. It isn't Josie at her discharge, though that one exists, a 16-year-old in a wheelchair she didn't need holding a sign a nurse made her grinning like someone who has just been handed 40 extra years. It's a picture Nell took on his phone badly at the gate at SeaTac 4 hours before any of the rest of it happened. It's mostly his elbow. In the corner you can see a departure board and the time and half of a stuffed orca. He keeps it because of what she said when she took it. She'd said, "Smile, we're going on an adventure." About a year afterward, Owen was asked to speak to a first-year class at a medical school, and the person introducing him made the mistake of telling the airplane story as a warm-up. When he got to the lectern, he stood there for a second, and then he set aside what he'd planned to say. "I want to correct something," he said. "That story is usually told as though the point is that they didn't know who I was. It gets shared with that headline. The pilot said his name, and people love it because it feels like justice the moment the sweater comes off and it turns out the nobody was a somebody all along. But that's not the lesson. That's the opposite of the lesson. Because think about what that version actually says. It says they should have treated him better because he turned out to be important, which means the rule still holds. It just means they misidentified who to apply it to. There were 94 people on that airplane. Any one of them could have been the surgeon. Any one of them could have been going to a funeral or a diagnosis or a custody hearing or the last 2 days of somebody's life. You cannot tell. That's the actual finding. You cannot tell by looking ever, and every system you build that assumes you can tell will eventually put its hand on the wrong person and break something that can't be fixed. I got lucky. There was a flag on a manifest and a captain who read it and a gate agent who made a phone call. Josie got her heart with 24 minutes to spare. 24 minutes is not a margin. 24 minutes is a coin landing on its edge. So don't take from this that you should be kind to people because they might turn out to be somebody. Take from it that the granola bar moves, that the ID doesn't come out fast enough, that the person in front of you who is not explaining themselves well, who looks tired and unimportant and slightly wrong for the room, is running out of time on something you cannot see. They almost always are. Josie Lindqvist is 22 now. She finished her list. Number 4, argue with someone about something stupid just because I have the energy. She crossed off on a Tuesday in a parking lot about a shopping cart, and she says it was one of the great afternoons of her life. Nell Reyes is 13. She still has the orca. And somewhere in a filing cabinet at an airline's headquarters, there is an 11-page document with a signature on the last page written by a woman who understood once very clearly what she owed to people she would never meet, and then spent 30 years forgetting it one small convenience at a time until the morning it cost her everything. She was right about one thing. She didn't know who he was. Nobody ever does. That's the whole reason it matters how you treat them.